The evening was perfect. The lights inside Victoria Whitman's mansion glowed like golden stars. Expensive wine flowed. Soft music filled the air. And the rich, powerful guests, all dressed in tuxedos and sparkling gowns, smiled as they mingled, laughed, and posed for pictures beneath crystal chandeliers. Victoria Whitman stood at the center of it all. She was beautiful, in the way a lioness is beautiful, confident, sharp-eyed, and always ready to pounce. Known throughout Beverly Hills as a socialite and philanthropist, Victoria didn't host charity dinners because she cared about the cause. No, this event, like all the others, was simply another way to show the world just how important she was. That night, the charity dinner was meant to raise money for underprivileged youth. But no one truly came to give. They came to be seen. And Victoria loved every second of it. She floated from table to table with her wine glass in hand, laughing at her own jokes, dropping names of celebrities and politicians like candy. You know, when I was speaking to the governor last week, she began more than once. But then something unexpected caught her eye. Near the far end of the ballroom, a teenage boy stood quietly with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. He was tall, thin, and wore a black suit that didn't quite fit. His name was Diego Santos. He was just 17, and he wasn't one of the guests. He was the son of Victoria's maid, Carmen. Victoria's smile widened, but it wasn't kind. She saw an opportunity for amusement, and Victoria loved to amuse herself, especially at the expense of those beneath her. She snapped her fingers. "Boy," she called out. Diego looked up, unsure if she meant him. She waved him over. "Yes, you. Come here." The room quieted just a bit. Diego approached slowly. Carmen, standing by the kitchen door in her black uniform, watched nervously. Her son was smart, too smart. And in this house, being smart could be dangerous. Victoria pointed to the chessboard set up near the fireplace. "Do you know how to play chess, or is that too fancy for your kind?" she asked with a smirk. A few guests chuckled, sipping champagne. Diego didn't flinch. He looked her in the eye and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I know how to play." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Wonderful," she said mockingly. "Why don't you show me how chess is played in the slums?" More laughter. Chairs were pulled closer. Guests gathered to watch. Carmen's heart raced. She wanted to step in, to pull her son away, but she couldn't. Her job, her home, her son's future, all were tied to Victoria. Diego took his seat calmly. Victoria sat across from him, adjusting her pearl necklace with dramatic flair. She moved first, a simple pawn. "I learned this at Harvard," she said loudly, for everyone to hear. "Ever heard of it?" Diego didn't reply. He quietly studied the board, then responded with a sharp, clean move. The Sicilian defense. It was unexpected, complicated, aggressive. It caught the attention of Mr. Hamilton, a retired businessman sitting nearby who had played chess for years. He leaned in closer, eyes narrowing. Victoria squinted at the board. "Interesting," she said, pretending to understand. "Copying something from YouTube, are we?" Diego didn't speak. He just kept playing, move after move. His fingers danced across the board with quiet precision. He wasn't just playing. He was thinking 4 steps ahead. Every piece he moved had a purpose. Every risk was calculated. Victoria started to frown. The laughter in the room softened. By the 15th move, Victoria had lost 2 bishops and a knight. She blamed the lighting. She accused Diego of distracting her. She cracked a joke about him hiding an earpiece. But Diego stayed silent, focused. Finally, he sacrificed a pawn. The room gasped. "That was stupid," someone muttered. But it wasn't stupid. It was bait. And Victoria took it. 2 moves later, she was in trouble. Her king was cornered. Her remaining rook was useless. She squinted at the board, then looked at Diego. "You're cheating," she snapped. He looked up slowly. "I've studied over 1,800 games by Kasparov," he said softly. "I've been practicing every day for 5 years." The room went completely still. Then, with one last move, Diego whispered, "Checkmate." Silence. No one laughed. No one clapped. Everyone just stared. Victoria sat frozen, face pale. For once, she had nothing to say. Mr. Hamilton let out a low whistle. "That boy's a genius," he said. A woman near the back, Congresswoman Mills, stepped forward. "Young man," she said, her voice warm, "how would you like a scholarship?" Diego looked at his mother. Carmen's eyes were wide with tears. Victoria finally stood, face burning. But before she could speak, Carmen stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but it was strong. "My son," she said, "deserves to be in much better places than this." Then she took his hand, and together, they walked out of that golden mansion, leaving behind the woman who thought she owned the world. And as they reached the door, someone pressed a business card into Diego's hand. A small, white card that would change everything. But that part comes next. That night, the story spread like wildfire. It started with whispers at the party. Whispers that carried embarrassment for Victoria and awe for Diego. Guests who had once laughed now replayed the chess game in their heads, stunned by how gracefully the young boy had dismantled a woman who believed she could never be outshined in her own house. Diego didn't say a word as he and his mother walked home, but his mind was racing. He remembered every single move of that game. Each piece, each step, each sacrifice. It wasn't just a game of chess. It was a moment of truth. A moment where he'd proven, without shouting or showing off, that he was more than what the world expected from a Maid's son. At home, their small apartment felt warmer than ever before. Carmen wrapped her arms around her son and whispered, "I've always known you were meant for something bigger." And for the first time in a long time, Diego allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was right. But over in Beverly Hills, Victoria Whitman was facing a different reality. Her evening had turned into a nightmare. The guests she once dazzled with her wit now avoided her calls. Pictures from the event flooded social media. One in particular went viral. A shot of Diego calmly sitting at the chessboard and Victoria frozen in shock. People weren't just laughing. They were criticizing. Headlines read, "Rich socialite humiliated by Maid's son in front of influential guests." From slums to strategy. Teen chess prodigy shuts down prejudice. Boy checkmates billionaire. And the internet can't stop talking about it. Victoria tried to control the damage. She claimed she let him win, accused Carmen of training her son to embarrass her, even threatened to sue one of the reporters for defamation. But it was no use. She wasn't just beaten. She was exposed. Meanwhile, Diego had no time for drama. Something far more exciting had entered his life. Opportunity. The card he was handed at the mansion came from a well-known talent scout who worked with gifted youth. A week later, Diego was invited to speak at a local youth conference. He wore a simple shirt, jeans, and his father's old shoes. But when he walked on stage, he stood tall. He didn't talk about Victoria. He didn't complain about poverty or injustice. He talked about discipline. He shared how he'd walk to the public library every day after school, sometimes skipping lunch just to study chess books. How he practiced for hours on a broken computer that only had one functioning key. How he once lost 30 games in a row and cried himself to sleep, but still got up the next day to try again. The audience gave him a standing ovation. One of the people in the crowd that day was a professor from Stanford University. That professor arranged for Diego to attend a summer program, and later, a full scholarship. When Diego told his mom the news, Carmen cried harder than he'd ever seen her cry. Not long after, a small production company reached out to create a short documentary about his life. Not for fame, Diego said. Only if it helps other kids believe they're not stuck. The film showed where he lived. The old, creaky apartment. His quiet room with chess pieces carved from wood scraps. His worn notebooks full of strategy diagrams and game analyses. And that unforgettable night in the mansion. But what touched viewers most wasn't the victory. It was the silence. How Diego never bragged, never yelled, never tried to prove anyone wrong. He just played. And in playing, he told the world exactly who he was. Back at the mansion, Victoria could no longer walk into a room with her head high. Charities removed her name from guest lists. Friends slowly pulled away. She became a cautionary tale, a symbol of pride and prejudice. And one day, as she sat alone in her grand home, scrolling bitterly through a news article about Diego's Stanford scholarship, she muttered, "It was just a game." But deep inside, she knew it wasn't. It was the moment she lost her power. Not to a rival, but to a boy she never thought mattered. And as for Diego, he didn't look back. He knew who he was now. Not just a chess player. Not just a lucky boy with a viral moment. He was a fighter, a dreamer, a young man who had faced the lion and walked away with his dignity intact. And he was just getting started. 6 months passed. Diego Santos now walked the clean, green campus of Stanford University, a place he'd only read about in borrowed magazines. His footsteps echoed in hallways filled with possibility. And every morning when he looked in the mirror, he saw the same boy, but standing taller. He still called his mother every night, still played chess every evening. But now he had classmates from all over the world, professors who challenged him, and a dorm room filled with books and a working laptop. No more cracked keyboards or missing keys. And back home, people whispered his name with pride. He wasn't just a boy from the slums anymore. He was the boy who made the world pay attention. The story of his quiet rise had taken on a life of its own. Journalists called him the king of silent wins. He was invited to speak on podcasts, at youth conferences, and even gave a TED Talk titled Playing the Long Game. But Diego didn't let the attention distract him. He stayed focused. And one night, as he sat under a tree on campus, notebook in hand, he thought back to everything. To that first broken computer. To his mother quietly slipping him extra rice on tough days. To the sneers and smirks at Victoria's mansion. To the checkmate that changed it all. He didn't smile because he'd proven them wrong. He smiled because he'd proven himself right. But that wasn't the end. Diego wanted to give back. He remembered what it felt like to be ignored, dismissed, laughed at. He remembered how many other kids were just like him. Talented, hungry to learn, but buried under poverty, ignored by society. So, he did something simple, yet powerful. He started an online chess program. Free for anyone, anywhere. It wasn't fancy. Just recorded videos, live Zoom calls, and a promise. If you're willing to learn, I'll teach you everything I know. Within a few weeks, kids from Nigeria, Brazil, India, and the Philippines were logging in. Some didn't even own chessboards. They used paper and bottle caps. But Diego didn't care. He said, "All grandmasters start with just one move." The program gained attention. Sponsors began to support it. Libraries across the country reached out to partner. Even former world champions offered to join. One evening, during a televised interview, a reporter asked him a pointed question. "Do you hold any resentment toward Victoria Whitman?" Diego paused. Then he smiled gently and said, "Grudges are like chess pieces that only block your next move. If I carried that weight, I'd never be able to move forward. She tried to make me feel small. Instead, she gave me the platform to show who I really am." The world loved that answer. And Victoria? She watched the interview from her now quiet mansion. The same chandelier still sparkled. The same halls still echoed. But the woman inside was different. She was no longer invited to events, no longer praised in magazines. She had money, but no voice. And in the deepest part of her heart, she knew the truth. The boy she tried to humiliate had become the man the world respected. Carmen, on the other hand, now smiled more than ever. She still cleaned houses, but now by choice. And when people asked, "Aren't you Diego's mom?" she nodded with pride. Because Diego didn't just change his life. He changed their life. He changed many lives. This story is not about chess. It's about dignity, perseverance, and humility. Victoria Whitman had wealth, education, and power. But she lacked the one thing that truly mattered: the ability to see people for who they are. Diego had none of her riches. But he had vision. He had patience. And he had the strength to wait for the right moment and seize it with grace. In the end, it wasn't just Victoria who got checkmated. It was the idea that money makes you better. It was the lie that status equals strength. Because the real king wasn't the one throwing the party. It was the quiet boy serving hors d'oeuvres. Greatness isn't inherited. It's earned. And sometimes, the people we overlook are the ones carrying the most powerful stories inside them, waiting for the right moment to be heard. So never judge. Never laugh at someone chasing a dream, because the pawn you mock today might just be the king of tomorrow.